I got to tell you, I'm having a serious adrenaline rush because so much fun to get to help think about what music we might sing, and then to have them totally rock it every time. It's just so exciting, and always to be friends and partners with Tom, and so thanks for letting me talk. And I also got to tell you that I've been a public speaker all my life, but I still have some crazy anxieties. Like a minute ago when the children were up here singing and this thing right here was turned the other way, and the choir director put her book on here. Well, my sermon's here. And so I was like, oh, don't take that sermon with you. Please don't take it anywhere. The other thing, just to tell you a little bit about being a public speaker, there's a lot of people who are always helping you, and especially if you use a microphone. And Austin's my man, wiring me up here. This thing runs down my back. It's hooked on my skirt. This is such an improvement from when I was in my 20s as a public speaker. And I'll tell you real quick a couple of silly stories that happened to me in a row. I was lecturing over at Abilene Christian University, and I had one of those clip-on things right here, and I had a silky shirt, and then the thing's heavy, and so it was almost a wardrobe malfunction, and so that was bad enough. I finished that lecture and worked it out, and I was on again in the next hour, so I said, I'm fixing this. I'm gonna hook it on to my skirt some way, and that wasn't good either. So it was nerve-wracking, and I don't even know how I got through it. One time I went and taught some girls about public speaking, and when I got to the front of the lecture room, I realized I had on 2 different shoes. So, and then we all know the dreams of, my age-old dream is sitting in a vast audience, and the MC or somebody says, and today Charme Robarts is our speaker, and I didn't even know I was the speaker, and I have that dream a lot, so that's enough. I'm having an adrenaline rush, but now I'm going to preach. Years ago, I was teaching Sunday school in Abilene, Texas, and I was teaching second graders, kind of like the little kids we had up here today. They were a lively bunch. And little Andrew created a wave of rowdiness on Palm Sunday because he pointed at flannel graph Jesus and he started laughing, really laughing and yelling, "He's riding a donkey, for Pete's sake." And in the crazy way that laughter is contagious, all you have to do is think about Jimmy Fallon for a minute and you start laughing. In that same way, everybody in the room is laughing. And of course, Andrew is quite inspired by this laughter, and he begins to demonstrate how donkeys bray and how they kick. So we had a Palm Sunday riot right there in the second grade classroom. As I look back on that fun and laughter, I think it's sad that this story we have in Scripture actually got subtitled The Triumphal Entry and then saddled with notions of triumphalism with its harsh and barking laughter and its boot on the throat of anybody who fails to conform. We probably all know that the way that Palm story reads in Scripture, it's meant to paint for us a picture of the way of humility and peace over against arrogance and domination and triumphalism. When kings ride into war, they ride a steed. But if they're riding in peace, they ride a donkey. So to add to our church-wide exploration of the various meanings of salvation, we can say today, using the words of Pope Francis, that salvation is being saved from the fantasies of triumphalism. Triumphalism imagines that a particular nation or religion or race or gang or tribe is superior and will triumph over others. And this is surely a diversion from the divine intent, with all of its craving for all the stuff, with all of its craving for certainty that we are sure will give us power if we only have it. And of course, with its disconnect from our fellow humans. And all of that causes us to fear each other. And so what do we do when we fear each other? We try to shut them out. We try to build a wall. We enslave them. We incarcerate them en masse, or we go to war and wipe them out. These are manifestations of triumphalism. But I think triumphalism is rooted in broken spirits that are looking for healing through domination. But the good news is that sometimes people, and really a lot of people, take another path, and they walk on it long enough that that path becomes clear and all of us can see it, and we feel inspired to walk on it too. Now, I want to say right away that the path of humility and peace is not a tepid kumbaya. It's actually marked with courage and discipline and a good dose of adventure and curiosity. People who walk on this path say there's got to be a better way. They say we're not going to put up with the status quo forever. And they say there's room for all of us on this path. One of those people is Malala Yousafzai. She's known mainly as a human rights activist. She's working, of course, for girls' education in northwest Pakistan, where at the beginning the local Taliban had banned girls from attending school. She's from a fortunate family, to be sure. Her father runs a chain of schools there in the region where she lives. And when she was only 11 years old, she was blogging for the BBC, detailing life under Taliban occupation. And she was also promoting education for girls. And for this, she became a target. In 2012, when she was on a school bus going to school, she was shot 3 times, receiving injuries to her head and her face and her shoulders. And the event, of course, gained worldwide attention. Fortunately, she did recover, and she continued her work, and that advocacy has now grown into an international movement. And in 2014, she was a co-recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest person to receive that award. I learned something really interesting when I was looking at her story again. A few years before that shooting, the Taliban had just reached into that region, and there came this edict that the girls would not be going to school after January 15th, 2009. Gunfire and burning the schools assured that the edict would be successful. But I was impressed to know that in solidarity with these girls, some of the boys' private schools also shut their doors in that first month to say no. Fortunately, there were some peace talks going on, and with time, the boys returned to school, the ban was partially lifted, and girls could return to school if they went to co-ed schools. And then, with more time passing, in Malala's region, the girls could return to school. To date, educational opportunities are improving there, but there's so much to be done. But it strikes me that a way to understand this path of humility is to understand that it's characterized by an unwillingness to sit and enjoy privilege while others remain underprivileged. I also read a story this week about a woman whose grandmother lived in the Nazi concentration camps. The grandmother's waist-long hair was cut off. She was completely shaved. She was tortured. She lost her parents and her siblings in the war, but somehow she escaped. The writer, that's her granddaughter, said that years later, she was in elementary school, this granddaughter, and she was learning about the concentration camps and about the war. And she remembered some of the things that her grandmother had said and that her mother had said about what her grandmother endured. And so one day she had had enough. She rushed home after school. She ran into the living room where her grandmother was, and she said, "I hate Germans for what they've done to you." The grandmother said, "The Germans are my friends. When I escaped and had nowhere to go, it was the Germans who took me in. They gave me food and shelter and clothing. They were kind to me." And so you see, the grandmother's refusal to perpetuate hate into another generation is what it will take to undermine this mentality that causes the atrocities like the Holocaust. And the granddaughter, now as an adult, writing about these things, is clearing the path for all of us. This writer also went on to say that she later, when she was in college, she made a trip to Nagasaki, where she visited Peace Park that memorializes the people that were lost when we dropped the bomb in 1945. She said she was kind of aware that she felt a little trepidation, a little fear being so American there. But she went on to the museum, and as she looked at the sites and read the plaques, she was overcome with grief. And so she left the museum, made her way out to a park bench, and she said, I just began to sob. She said, I sobbed for my grandmother's story back in Europe. I sobbed for all of these Japanese who lost so many. And she said, I just gave it up and sobbed for the whole thing, for all the wars that are surely to follow after this. As she was sitting there crying, an older Japanese woman saw her and came over, joined her at the park bench, and took her hand and said, it starts now. Peace starts now with you and me. And so this journalist, sitting on a park bench in Nagasaki, cleared the path for us. I think of Father Gregory Boyle, a Jesuit priest who's worked for decades in Los Angeles among gang members. He founded Homeboy Incorporated, asking the simple question, can we improve the health and safety of our community through education and jobs rather than suppression and incarceration? And that is done. There are lots of jobs now for young men and women who are leaving the gang life. And an interesting thing is, sometimes ex-gang members who were enemies are cooking pizza dough together at Homeboy Incorporated. Because of Boyle's imagination and strong belief in common humanity, lives have turned in a better direction. Of course, I know, you know, none of these efforts solves everything. In fact, they all exist against the backdrop of terrible things. Like Dickens says, we live in the best of times, we live in the worst of times, and it is always that way, isn't it? I think that's always true. The power and the capability that humans have to bring about good and to care for each other is always contrasted with the terrors and the sorrows that we know only too well. And we live in this tension with our contradictory impulses and beliefs, and yet we always have before us the possibility and the reality of good. The challenges we face are real, but so is the power that we have to address them. It's important to remember about that donkey ride into Jerusalem. Many interpreters believe that, in fact, the people were cheering and welcoming Jesus and calling him the one that comes in the name of the Lord because they quite expected for Jesus to overthrow the occupying army. They wanted an authoritarian fix, someone to triumph. And it's certainly understandable. They were oppressed. And oppressed people are fearful and angry and resentful. And I'm pretty sure every one of us knows what that feels like too. We know fear, we know resent, we know anger because there's so many terrible things. It's tempting to expect some strong leader to lead us to glory. But if that's what the people wanted on that day, on that ride to Jerusalem, they most certainly did not get it. Because the whole Jesus thing turned out to be something other than that. Riding on that donkey, he beat down a path toward peace and goodwill. My little friend in Abilene thought it was pretty crazy for Jesus to be riding a donkey. Maybe so. But these stories that I've told today, and there's so many like them, we could tell so many of them, they speak to us of another path, and I think we should tell these stories all the time, and we should focus on the work of the dreamers, the people among us who write and paint and make music and invent things and find cures for things and mediate peace and build boats, all of those people are making that path clear for us. And to focus on those things, well, it just energizes us. So Austin, here's to the crazy ones.